Welcome back to Off Ball Takes. This is your host, Yarby Laws, and this is my co-host.
For Walls.
We appreciate all the support on our recent content, and before we do get started, please don't forget to like and subscribe, and follow us on Instagram and TikTok at the OBT Podcast for more content and updates.
Yes, so we're going through the NBA season. We're in March. We're in probably the strangest stretch of the NBA season where you can kind of look and you see a lot of teams where you have good teams, right, that are trying to win as many games as they can to try to move up in the standings. You have the teams at the top that are kind of at the point where, all right, we've clinched a spot for ourselves, so let's kind of just start gearing up for the postseason. Let's get healthy. Let's start sitting some of our guys for some of these games. We don't have to push it. And then you have the teams at the bottom that have guys that are trying to make NBA rosters and just have random nights where they decide to spoil it for some of these other teams, right? And we've been having all of that for the last several days, right? So you had a stretch where we had the last couple of nights, right? We had some pretty big games and some really intriguing situations, right? We had the Clippers and the Cleveland Cavaliers, right? Where the Cavs now have lost 3 in a row. They actually lost another one after that, right, to the Sacramento Kings. But the Clippers had a really strong performance where you can kind of see in the last, few weeks or so, Kawhi's been ramping it up. He's been healthier. He had 33 against the Cavs, right? Looking more like himself. Obviously, you still have Harden being able to do his thing. Zubac dominated, had a 2020 game against the Cavs front court. Even, Norman Powell didn't do much, but obviously he's kind of coming back from and working his way back from an injury. And, just like a lot of the other teams in the Western Conference, right, that are trying to climb up, they are now 7-3 in their last 10. They've won 4 in a row, and now they're, as of this recording, the 7 seed, right? After the Timberwolves lost back-to-back games, two rough situations, and now have quotes about how they're in a funk again, which is weird because they're 8-2 in their last 10. But those last 2 losses were rough. But are we seeing anything from the Clippers that makes us feel like could they give one of these higher seeds a possible scare?
No.
Or are we kind of in the phase of still can't trust this team? We've seen how the script goes. These guys just unfortunately aren't able to stay healthy by the time the playoffs roll around. You just can't trust them.
Yeah, I think we're probably going to be looking at a situation where, Kawhi is going to have some sort of self-reported stinger, etc., or whatever, and then he's going to miss some time, and then that's going to lead into more missed time. Harden's play is probably going to drop off come playoff time, if they even make the playoffs, because they do have to get out of the play-in first, if the playoffs started today. And I mean, like, they're as a collective unit, I think I like, some of the things that are on the team, and some of the things that they've been able to demonstrate in their last 10. But, there's still some aspects of it where I'm like, okay, this really isn't a playoff team or a team that can really, get out of the first round. So, I could see them getting out of the play-in and, going into like a 7-game series or something like that. But even then, I feel like that might be a little bit too high in terms of aspirations. Like, it wouldn't surprise me if they got swept either. They're just that kind of team. Like, Zubac is fine. Obviously, Kawhi playing back into shape is a great thing to see, but regardless, I think playoff time, we're just going to see this team kind of crumble again.
Yeah, it may come down to there may be a couple of teams that maybe they could pull off an upset, maybe Houston, right? Possibly, just depending on the situation. But again, the tough part is having to bank on Kawhi being healthy, because that's really the only way they could pull that off. And that just has not happened the last several seasons, right? He's just not been able to complete, an entire season healthy. Even last year, right? He was healthy for most of it. Then right at the end gets hurt. And then in the playoffs, couldn't really play. And even when he did play, he was a shell of himself. So, that's kind of the tough part there, where if it wasn't the Clippers, given like their history, I think you could feel better about them, even though like they do have nights where they look really good. They do have nights against some of these good teams where like they look like they could be, at least an interesting team. But it's just kind of hard to get excited about them when we've seen what's happened every time. Because even last year, right, for a while we were excited about them for most of the first half of the season. Then guess what happened the second half of the season? Completely fell off the map, right? And then by that point, then they came out of the playoffs and lost in the first round again. Yep. So that's kind of the tough part there. But again, the West, it is all about matchups, right? Because, if most of the other higher seeds, I think it would, like, they probably wouldn't be able to win because I just think those teams are better. But maybe it could be a tough out, right? Like maybe they could challenge those teams to like a hard fought 6 or 7. But I think it'd be tough for them to ask them to pull off an upset. Like I said, unless maybe if it was the Rockets just because of the lack of experience. They've played the Nuggets pretty well too, so maybe that could be a problem. I'm not sure, but I don't know. And like you said, the Harden factor too, because he just tends to be a worse player in the playoffs. And if you don't get a really good version of Harden, then they might be a little bit tough. But they do have the defense, although it's mainly been the offense that's been better as of late. And that's because Kawhi's back, right? I think you're just hoping to find that balance. Now, as for the Wolves, right, they're also 8-2 in their last 10, but unfortunately, 2 poorly timed losses. One to the Pacers, where they lost in overtime because Obi Toppin just decided to play like Klay Thompson or Steph Curry or whichever great 3-point shooter you want to bring up. Where the Wolves really had the game, and then, like I said, he just, that one you can't even be mad about. Like obviously, the last possession that they had to try to win the game in the end of the fourth. There's a lot of these bad possessions where it's kind of just like we're gonna give Edwards the ball in contested space, have him shoot over like 3 people, and it just doesn't work, right? Like it does, it just you'd like to get some better shots than that. I mean, a lot of the end of game situations are we're gonna put the ball in the hands of our best player and just kind of see if they can do anything. But it's rough. But then you had the Pelicans one. That one is tough, right? Because another game that just slipped away, right? And this is another one of these spoiler ones where the Pelicans, right? They just lost. We hadn't even talked about it, right? Where Trey Murphy, right? They lost another guy due to injury the rest of the season, right? Trey Murphy was having a great season, the best season of his career, tears his labrum. Yeah. So now Pelicans come in, barely anybody left on the roster. Zion comes in like a monster and steals the game against the Wolves, right? And, again, we talked about Zion previously where he's been playing really well. What does it mean? What does it mean for New Orleans? Are they going to trade him? Are they going to keep him? But, for the Wolves, it's tough, right? Because they had a chance to jump up to 6. Then they couldn't do it, right? They were kind of given a lifeline, right? Where the Nuggets sit their guys against Golden State. Golden State manages to lose. But then the Wolves, same night, can't get it done. They lose to the Pacers in OT. Then they lose again to the Wolves. And now they're 2 losses behind, but effectively 3 because they don't have the tiebreaker. So what's going on with them? And we even had a Julius Randle quote after the loss to the Pelicans, basically talking about how they're in a funk. We got to try to figure out how to get back into a rhythm. And it's like you just went 8-10. Like what happened, right? Like what happened these last couple of games? Like obviously they were playing a lot of mediocre teams, but they also had some great wins like against the Denver Nuggets, right? So just it's that point in the season, which is where it gets really tough. But I don't know. His full quote was the energy is off. It's funky. We're not playing with that same spirit or the same confidence. We've got to find a way to get our swag back and just go out and dominate like we've been.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like they really reverted back to, what we saw a little bit earlier in the season where, it's too much one-on-one stuff. It's too much rely on Anthony Edwards or, nothing. The efficiency was kind of down from, a lot of the guys that they had been relying on during the time that they were playing well. Specifically like the Indiana game was the one where I was kind of looking around like, well, this doesn't look like the team that we were just talking about, unfortunately, and I think that's the tough part is, when you have a guy like Edwards who, can do a bunch and, is capable of shooting the 3 ball so well at such a high volume, when he has nights that it doesn't go in, it looks 10 times worse. And especially, when he's getting doubled and tripled and he's not making the right read, which I think is another aspect of the game. Like overall, they just weren't making the right reads as a team together, and you can definitely see it in the efficiency. And then defensively, obviously, I think letting Obi Toppin kind of just, like you said, turn into prime Steph, prime Klay is just unacceptable. I think, you have the tools and capabilities to make sure that doesn't happen defensively. And lo and behold, they still let it happen.
And then Minnesota's front court, and then New Orleans front court just ate their lunch.
Yeah, I don't even know what to say about that. I mean, like, hey, you gotta give it to Zion. He had a freaking pretty solid showing, but I think there's something they could have done. They could have made some adjustments. But then once again, offensively, just couldn't find anything in late game situations. That's just not a good sign, if your end goal is going to be, to get into the playoffs and, actually go pretty far. But I don't really know what to make of it. It seems like a complete reversion. It's weird.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's rough because, again, they had a chance to move up to 6, right, with Golden State losing to the Nuggets, right, without Jokic and Jamal Murray, but they just could not take advantage. And that's kind of a tough spot to be in, right? We'll kind of also talk about a couple other teams that are, not playing as well recently, too. Right, the New York Knicks, 4-6 in their last 10. They lost 2 in a row. Obviously, they are without Jalen Brunson. It's just rough because back-to-back losses against bad teams, right? I mean, they got, and also 2 games where it wasn't particularly close either, right? A blowout loss to the San Antonio Spurs, right, who are now without Victor Wembanyama and De'Aaron Fox, right? Instead, it's our guy Sandro Mamukelashvili, right, who had 34 points, 13 of 14 from the field, 7 of 7 from 3 in just 19 minutes of play. Obviously, again, these are always kind of these weird games. Sometimes it happens against bad teams where guys go off, guys are trying to stick around. It's just tough because, like, for the Knicks, it's just they've kind of been really rough without Brunson, which you kind of expect, at least on the offensive end, but it's just tough. But obviously for them, the thing is that you don't want to keep losing only just because eventually, if you keep losing, right, the teams below you may catch up again. They do have, at least as of right now, a 3-game lead in the loss column against the Indiana Pacers. So it's not like they're in danger of losing it right now. It's something to think about. But you also, if you're the Knicks, would like to kind of find some games to be able to steal minutes and kind of not have to have guys play a lot just because you want guys to be ready and healthy for the playoffs. And I don't think they'll lose the 3 seed at this point, but it's just something to think about because it's been rough, because, and again, like, we knew that without Brunson, they were going to have to figure out how to score, but they were going to have to figure out how to win without him, but it just has not worked. And I mean, like, offensively, they can't do much. And it doesn't help that Josh Hart has just not been very good offensively since the All-Star break, where now he can't shoot anymore. And he still can give you rebounds and assists and defense, but they need him to knock down shots because that was I mean, obviously they're still a really good offensive team when he doesn't play as well, but obviously they're even better when he can do it all, right? Including the jump shooting, because you need that from him. And obviously, like, it's not the only issue, but I guess it's nice to see Mitchell Robinson with a double-double off the bench, but they need Brunson back, which we figured. It's just they need him back sooner rather than later, but we don't know when he's coming back. He is out of a walking boot,
Yeah.
so that's at least a good sign, but he still probably is a little ways away from coming back.
Yeah, I mean, we all knew this was going to happen. They were going to start dropping games because Brunson isn't out there. We already know. The offense is quite literally built and predicated around him. Without him, there is little to no, offense, especially in that backcourt. And I think you definitely saw the struggles in the San Antonio game. But defensively, I think is where they, are really continuing to struggle. And, Brunson's obviously not, a great defender or anything like that. So, you would kind of expect the defense not to get worse, but it quite literally has. And, that's on the wing guys. That's on the front court as well. So, I think construction wise, they're clearly not in the same tier as the teams above them. They're closer to, I think, what Milwaukee is at the moment. And, that's not, I think, the tier that you would kind of want to be if you're putting all this money and you kind of mortgage, a little bit of your future, if not all of it, to get a guy like Mikal Bridges and then, OG Anunoby and those guys not really, living up to, I think, the expectation, considering that Brunson has been out and, you haven't gotten a ton of great play, maybe from Bridges, I guess, but
Yeah.
the other guys have just been thoroughly disappointed. And I mean, Towns is kind of getting his own here and there, but like you said, like Hart, like the wings is where I'm really, really disappointed.
Yeah, and again, it's tough, and that's kind of the issues. With the Knicks team, we already knew it wasn't a very deep team, so we knew any injury sustained to one of the key guys would be really tough to be able to withstand because they
Yeah.
just don't have the depth pieces after them to be able to hold up. And again, like it'd be one thing if it was like just a really tough stretch of schedule, right? Where it's like you're just constantly playing a bunch of good teams, but that really hasn't been the case, right? I mean, since Brunson got hurt in the Laker game, obviously you did play a couple of good teams in the Clippers and the Warriors, right? But outside, a couple of times, but then, you played the Kings, you did get the win against them, the Blazers, the Heat, and then you got, 3 straight games against some of the worst teams in the league, right? I mean, the Spurs record-wise aren't, but obviously they're very shorthanded. You lost to them. Before we got on, they lost to the Charlotte Hornets, another game that was not particularly close. Then they'll play the Wizards.
Yeah.
Then they'll play the Mavs, right? So if you lose one more of those, right, then that becomes really tough because then after that you got a couple games against the Clippers and the Bucks, and the Bucks one, you'd like to win that one. Because if you can win that one, then that probably shuts off the ability for either of those teams to catch up to you. But, do they have the tiebreaker against the Pacers?
I believe so. I think so.
Yeah, because I know. Yeah, because they won. I think they won the first matchup and they lost the second matchup, and then I think they won the third matchup. So they have the tiebreaker against them. So that's my point where, at a certain point, I wonder if they kind of consider just sitting some guys just to keep some guys fresh. But you probably can't do that yet because, again, you probably would like to have maybe a few more extra losses given to the other teams below them. But I don't know. We'll see what happens. But it is tough. But that's just kind of the issue for them. But we'll see if they can pull it off. I mean, first round. If they stay the 3 seed, even that's not really for sure, right? We don't know who the 6 seed's going to be just yet. I mean, it could be anybody between the Pacers, the Bucks, and the Pistons. They're all basically tied. So,
yeah,
it'll be fun either way. But yeah, it is rough. But we thought it probably would be tough without Brunson. It's just there's not a ton of like horrible games in there, but it's gonna get a little bit tougher.
Yeah.
Then for the Bucks, they're 5-5 in the last 10. They've lost 2 in a row, and after the loss to the Warriors without Steph, sounds like Doc Rivers had a meeting with Lillard and Giannis, I guess, so that way everybody can get on the same page, I suppose. I'm not really sure what's going on there because I remember earlier in the season, right, they had an issue, right, when they were bad, right, and then Lillard and Giannis mentioned that, all right, we're going to put it on us to, make sure that our team can do better. Right. But then they did turn it around for a while. Right. But now, yeah, it's not been great for them. And the tough part is they've lost some games to teams that, I think it would have been nice if they didn't lose to them. A couple of them were just like brutal. Were like just crazy. Right. Like the Pacers one where, what was it? Halliburton got like a 4-point play.
Yep.
Right at the end.
Yep.
The next time they played them, I think they blew them out. So I'm pretty sure they have the tiebreaker against the Pacers. But it just seems like they're just not quite good enough. Like you said, not a bad team, but just not quite in the same tier as the other teams above them, like Boston and Cleveland, this season, which is rough because you have Giannis, right? Like you have a guy who's considered, a top 5 player,
and
right?
Dame.
And Dame too, right? But it just seems like it just hasn't worked. And for what it's worth this season, right, their defense hasn't really been the issue, right? Like, if you look at what they've been doing on the defensive end, it's a lot better than last year, right? I mean, last year for most of the season, I think until maybe, I don't know, maybe 3/4 of the season in, they were like one of the worst defensive teams in the league, right? This season, they're top 10, they're 10th in defense, right? But then the problem is the offense, right? Like offensively, they're 16th.
Yep.
And, if you look at their last 10ish games, right? It's not very good, right? Like, I mean, that's kind of the problem for them and again, they made the move at the deadline where they moved on from Chris Middleton, brought in Kuz, right? And he's been fine, I suppose, right? Like he's had some quality games here and there. But then also they got Kevin Porter Jr. and Jericho Sims, right, as, I guess, athletic bench pieces. They have been without Bobby Portis, right? So that's a guy more so helps them on offense than defense, right? But I guess he does give them some extra size, some floor spacing. But then they just got hit with Jericho Sims getting hurt, right? He's, I think, underwent thumb surgery. So now they don't really have a backup big at all, right? Like, I mean, sometimes they'll experiment with Giannis at the 5, but they really haven't done it that much, right?
Yeah.
And that's kind of something where you wonder, like, where is that, right? Because you would think against some teams where you might be able to get away with playing him at the 5 and play small. But I don't know. I don't really think it's all on Doc. I just think it just goes back to, I just don't think the team is quite as good as we think. And I think it mainly has to do with the surrounding pieces after Giannis and Lillard, where it's just a lot of guys where, like, yeah, if they get hot, the 3-point shooting can be really good and it gives him spacing to work with. But it just feels like some of these guys are very limited. And I just don't necessarily know come playoff time how much you're going to be able to bank on it. I mean, you could just bank on Giannis just being awesome and hopefully healthy, right? Seems like these guys have been playing through injuries too, so maybe that is part of it, right? Because if you look at Giannis's numbers, right, there's been a little bit of a drop. Like, he's still playing really well, right? But it's not quite what he was doing earlier in the season, right? So, I mean, I don't know what to say. I mean, we've talked about this Bucks team where going into the season, I think we just kind of thought it would be more of the same, right? And, by the time they close out the season, it probably will be, right? Because, right now, they're the 5 seed. Of course, that could change and get better. But, standings wise, record wise, they're going to do worse this year, right? Because last year they were the 3 seed, if I'm not mistaken, right? This time around, top 3 is not going to happen, I don't think, for them, right? They're probably locked into at best 4, and it could be 6 depending on how the rest of the season goes, right? Because Pacers have been playing relatively well, Pistons have been playing great, so I don't know. I mean, what's wrong with this team, and what would be the reason for Doc to hold and Giannis and Lillard to hold another meeting again? Like, that just kind of screams that something's just not going right with this team.
Well, I when we talked about this team in the offseason, I think I gave them like a C or something like that. Something
Mm-hmm.
along those lines. I think you were a little bit higher on them than I was, but I was not confident in what they, had built and constructed, via the offseason. And, I wasn't too impressed with the free agency class that they, or free agency guys that they brought in, trades, nothing like that. And even like deadline wise, I mean, Kuz is fine. Like, he'll give you more than what Middleton was giving you, but I mean, the end result has kind of just been more mediocrity, and I think that's the problem. Like, if you really look at this roster, and the guys that they have been playing as of late, it's Giannis and Dame at the top, of the roster. Then you have Kuz, Torian Prince, Kyle Kuzma, Brooke Lopez, Gary Trent Jr., Kevin Porter Jr. Like, these aren't really, like, especially on the bench, it's really low quality role players, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
And like you said, defensively is not the problem. I'm glad they patched that up because I think that's, I think that makes their playoff, ceiling a little bit higher. But the offense is just so bad because they don't really have a ton of creators and a ton of guys that you can kind of just put out there and they can be, elite spark plugs. They're just not a deep team, and that's what I think it comes down to. And I would assume that the meeting is probably like, you know, talking to Dame and Giannis about taking
Right.
over. Like, and it's not that they haven't been taking over this season because they've both been having relatively good seasons, but I think you're probably looking for more from your top guys. And I know that's probably a tough ask, considering what Giannis does on a nightly basis. And, Dame's been showing out a little bit here and there. But that's what I think it comes down to. Like, I don't really think this is poor coaching. I think this is just poor roster construction. Simple as that. Like, just look at it.
Yeah. Yeah. I tend to kind of agree with that too. I just kind of wonder, like let's say, you're Doc, right? And then I'm either Lillard or Giannis. Like, what are we discussing? Like, what are we trying to figure out in terms of how to, kind of maximize the team? But, like you said, they're kind of, there's not really anybody outside of those two where you kind of look at them for, like you said, additional creation. I mean, it's kind of got, like, say Kuzma can put the ball on the floor, but I think ideally, right, he's much better as a finisher. Like, can he make the extra pass? Can he be a connector piece? Sure, right? But, that's kind of the downside of moving on from Middleton. But obviously we know they mainly did it because he just wasn't physically able to hold up, right? Like if Middleton were healthy, that would probably make this Bucks team like look significantly better, right? Look closer to a legit title
Yeah,
contender.
100%.
Yeah, because like you said, that some of the problems that they have offensively, he could solve because he can be a guy that can be
Yeah,
an extra shot creator, an extra
because
playmaker, ball handler and shooter. And when he was healthy and not post surgeries, right, a decent defender, right? Like obviously, if he would still probably kind of struggle a little bit against more athletic wings, but he'd be a better option than what they had.
people forget that they don't win that title without Middleton. I don't give a crap. Like they don't win that title without him. And we've seen and saw flashes of him kind of returning to that form in previous years. But like you said, that's the danger moving on from him, because then you look at Kuzma, right,
Mm-hmm.
and the efficiency is just not there. And I think that's another problem. Like offensively, if you're not efficient as a unit, I mean, shoot, what can you really do? Like he's shooting 42% from the field and 30 from three, better than he was doing in Washington, but still not nearly enough to be the number 3 option on a contending team. If that's what Milwaukee's goal is, I'm assuming that's what it is. As long as you have Giannis on the team, I would assume you're attempting to contend for championships. But that's not going to be possible with a roster like this. No shot.
Yeah, minutes wise, yeah, he's up to 33. Pretty much been a starter for them. And like you said, like not a bad player at all. It's just I think ideally when he was healthy, Middleton just made more sense
Yeah.
for what they had. But again, this was also I think a cost cutting move, right? Like they were able to get under the second apron. That's how they were also able to make the additional moves they made, right? Like so, but like you said, it's just when you look at their bench guys and then you look at the bench guys for some of these other teams, it just doesn't hold up. And it's a shame because like high end talent wise, right? It's fine. Like you said, because you have Giannis, a top 5 guy, and you have Lillard, who has a second option, can be really good, right? Obviously, there's going to be certain teams, certain matchups where we know that they're going to pick on him, but at least offensively, right? Like it's a good fit. But like you said, just offensively as a team, it's just lacking pretty much after those 2 guys. And that's where you kind of wonder what's next for this team if their season were to go south. Like, let's say they go out in the first round again, right? Like, where would you even go from that point, right? Like, would you finally be headed to an exodus of Giannis from Milwaukee? Do they just retool? Can they even really retool? I mean, just given what they have to work with, I don't know.
I mean, when is Giannis a free agent next?
Yeah, I mean, I think because he signed that extension, right after they got the Lillard deal, right? Right after they got the Lillard trade done. So, I mean, you're talking about this is year 2 of that. So, I mean, he's got like I think 2 years left.
Yeah, so I mean, he could ask out. Does he get moved though? That's the question. I don't know.
Only if he asks out. I mean, they wouldn't just trade him.
Yeah, no, no, no.
Just
That's my point. Like,
yeah,
I don't know how likely that situation is.
yeah.
I know that he kind of likes to dangle that and throw that out there, here and there, where it's like, well, if we're not going to be a winning team, then why the heck am I going to be here? Like,
Okay.
you know what I mean?
So contract wise, yeah, he's got 2 years after this one, and then a player option in 27, 28.
Mm-hmm.
So he's under contract for a while. It's just a matter of, if they don't win it this year, which I don't think they will,
No.
I don't think they're going to be able to be much better next season with what they have. I mean, because, Lopez will be a free agent. Do they re-sign and bring him back? I think Portis will have a player option. Connaughton, I guess, player option. Like they don't really have a lot of options like with the players they have, and there also weren't really any young guys that they have where it's like, oh, we can kind of build them up and elevate them into the rotation, right? They traded a guy that they just drafted, right? What was it, AJ Johnson or whatever?
Yep.
Andre Jackson Jr. He doesn't even play anymore.
Yep.
I don't think so. He went from a bench guy to starter to just now reserve.
Yep.
Right? And that's a guy that they drafted. So I don't know. I don't really have much of an answer for that, but I don't know. I would definitely say don't think they're winning the title. Probably going out first or second round, unless they get hot, right? Yeah, maybe second round. unless somebody gets hot. And then after that, I don't know, because again, like you said, the goal for this group is to win a title. I don't think they're close enough to really do it. I mean,
No.
I guess if you squint, but they're in that tier where they need luck to go their way. Like everybody needs luck, but some teams need less luck than others because they're just better,
Yep.
right? So that's kind of the issue there. And like I said, after this season, I don't know what you would do. Like, I mean, yeah, you could try to trade Lillard, but I mean, is he really the problem with the team? Not really.
No.
I mean, and then there's not really anyone else where it's like, and none of these other guys are in high demand, and it's a lot of guys that don't really make that much money. So that's kind of the other issue too. So they're in a tough spot. And like we said, we said going into the season, it's felt like that they were kind of going backwards, whereas some of the other teams are kind of passing them by, right? Where it felt like the core of this group was probably done. And, clearly they felt so too, because they moved on from Chris Middleton. But I don't think there's much that can save this team this season. But, we'll see where they ultimately end up finishing. But I think anything past second round, I'd be pretty surprised. And I feel like that'd be kind of disappointing for a team that made, a pretty big splash a year or two ago.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. What about the Cavs? Because
Hmm.
we've talked about Boston when they had that stretch where they were kind of struggling. I wouldn't really call this a stretch, but now the Cavs have lost 3 in a row, right? And 3 losses, 1 to the Magic, 1 to the Clippers, and then 1 to the Kings, right? No Levine, and I believe no Sabonis either, who's also hurt, right, for a stretch. So is there any real concern here, right? Or is it just, is it kind of like, is it a scenario where maybe they've just kind of ran out of gas and maybe this is closer to who they are? Or is it kind of just, they're fine? It's, they've pretty much clinched the 1 seed. So they're kind of just doing whatever. I know Mitchell's been terrible, and that's probably part of it. Honestly, that's probably one of the biggest reasons why they've been struggling. But beyond that, is there anything else, right? The DeAndre Hunter deal, right? Does he still look all right, given, what they probably are asking of him? I mean, again, like personally, if just kind of as a quick thing, I think they're fine, right? It's probably a slump. They've barely lost games this season. They were going to lose X amount of games at some point. And for them, the 1 seed is just a wrap. So, like, there's no real need to really push yourself the rest of the way. Obviously, you'd like to at least be in somewhat of a rhythm so that way you're not in the playoffs and all of a sudden it's like, holy moly, what's going on here? But I don't think there's really too much to be concerned about. It's again, it's a weird stretch in the NBA season where I feel like this type of stuff happens a lot.
Yeah, they're fine. I'm not worried about them at all. It's 3 little games, out of the like, however many they played, thus far. They're 56-13, so it's not like, we're in danger zone of missing the playoffs or anything like that. Some play has sputtered off, but I think that's okay. We're closer to the end of the season, where I think they can afford to kind of take these L's, and coming off a huge win streak like that is draining. It's tiresome, and I think
Right.
they're kind of feeling that, and you can definitely tell some of the players are definitely feeling that. Like Donovan Mitchell is one of them, like you talked about. We saw some uncharacteristic play at times, especially during the Clippers game, from certain guys, and I think that's normal for this part of the season. You're gonna see some teams come out of nowhere and get a weird upset, and
Right.
that's their 5 seconds of stardom for a second, and then next week we'll be fine. We'll be talking about the Cleveland Cavaliers are hot again. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like it's going to be the
Yeah.
same thing. It
Right.
happens, and
That's
the cool thing is I think defensively they're still okay. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Sure. Yeah. I mean, the Clippers, they're in a stretch where they have to win every game,
Mm-hmm.
right? They're not a 1 seed. They're not, their seeding isn't locked up. They have to win every game from here on out.
Yep.
Right. And we talked about it right at the beginning of this episode, right? Where we're in that stretch where bad teams have guys that are going to try to show up and show out. Good teams, right, are trying to win as many games as they can. And then the best teams have kind of wrapped things up, like, say, OKC, right? They've had games now where they're sitting like all their starters, right? Because they're so far ahead of the Western Conference, of the rest of the Western Conference, where they can do whatever they want now, right? Like they've been, running different lineups, right? They have Jalen Williams, the center, starting and getting triple doubles, right? Like all kinds of things,
Mm-hmm.
right? And that's perfectly fine at this point in the season. Kind of like at one point their coach Dagnall, right, talked about experimenting with certain lineups, right? Like for a while they were experimenting with the two bigs, right, to kind of get them reps, see how things work, and you saw the results of that against a team like Boston, right, where that lineup was crucial to them getting that win,
Yep.
right? So things like that you can do if you're in the spot like OKC and the Cavs, right, where everything regular season wise, is kind of a lock. You just kind of have to now get ready to prepare for playoff mode, but also make sure that guys are healthy too, right?
Yeah.
Because those are teams that are going to try to contend for the title,
Mm-hmm. They'll be all right.
right? Yeah. Then we look at the rest of the Western Conference, right? Classic standings watch as we usually do, right? Obviously, we did have kind of a couple of results that we already talked about, right? Because we already talked about the Wolves losing a couple of games, dropping to 8, and then the Clippers winning 7 of their last 10, 4 in a row, moving up to 7. But we also had a scenario between the Lakers and the Nuggets, right, where the Nuggets ended up after sitting their guys against Golden State, they sat the guys against the Lakers as well, and the Lakers pulled off that win. So now they have the tiebreaker, not head to head because they're 2-2, but they have a divisional tiebreaker because the OKC Thunder have the best record in the division that the Nuggets play in. They play in the same division.
Yep.
The Lakers have the best record in the Pacific Division, right? So that's all the California teams and then the Phoenix Suns, right? So they have that. So right now, right, we have Houston as the 2 seed who've won 8 in a row, right? They're 45-25. They're on a roll. They're on a tear. Amen Thompson, I believe, is about to come back, right? So that's great for them. Hopefully they can stay healthy the rest of the way, and we can kind of see what they end up doing. And then after that, Lakers are 3rd, Nuggets are 4. Of course, that could easily change. And then the Grizzlies, now they're, I believe, a full game behind the Nuggets because they've lost 2 in a row. Ja's been out the last couple of games, and it seems like he's going to be out more games as well, right as Jaren Jackson Jr. comes back. So that's rough. And then Golden State is still 6, with 2 more losses than Memphis. So Memphis better watch out, right? Because if they lose a few more games, right, then they're going to drop maybe to Golden State, below Golden State, because they have the tiebreaker over Memphis, I'm pretty sure. I think they may play them one more time, but I'm pretty sure I think Golden State's won, like 2 of those 3 so far. So, and I mean, I guess division-wise, I guess the Grizzlies have the best record in their no, the Rockets do. So, yeah, so I don't even know how that would work tiebreaker-wise, but I think the Warriors probably would have the edge in that one.
Yeah. I mean, the West
Mhm.
is it's crazy. And
Yeah.
one through 8, like I feel okay about, There's nobody, that I feel like is a complete fraud or, shouldn't necessarily be there, Whereas in the Eastern Conference, like 1 through 8 is a very different story over there.
Yeah.
And I think, that's the interesting part about the Western Conference. Like, you feel crazy about Houston, but then you have a lot of questions. Like, well, we've never really seen this team in a 7-game series. What do they look like? Are they consistent? Are they inconsistent? Who's their number one option? We still don't know. Like, we have so many questions about that team. The Lakers, obviously, we know what they can be capable of. We saw,
Right.
where they were on a stretch, and now they're kind of returning to that, 3-game win streak, etc. So that's good. Denver, I think people have some questions about that team collectively going into the postseason, especially defensively. Like, what the heck do they look like? Memphis, I think, is poised to give people a scare, depending on what they look like health wise going into the final stretch of the season. The Warriors, I think they're intriguing because the Jimmy Butler factor. I'm sure that will play a part. So it's a whole. There's a ton of storylines there that are gonna be potentially kind of crazy, and I'm hoping that the seeding is kind of similar to what it looks like right now. You know what I mean? Where
Mhm.
Golden State doesn't fall into the play, and I don't want that to happen. I feel like that would make things a little less exciting because at that point I'm like, well, they're probably not going to get out of the first round. You know what I mean? So
Mhm.
I'm kind of expecting and hoping that the standings look relatively similar to what they are right now.
And supposedly JJ Redick said that LeBron, they're hopeful he comes back on Saturday, right? Because they just wrapped up, or they're about to wrap up their 6 games in 8-night stretch, right? I
Yeah.
think they're playing as we're recording, but they're sitting most of their guys, right?
Yeah.
Because it's the second night of a back to back, right? Where again, 3 straight back to backs.
Who are they
So
playing?
if you,
Milwaukee, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly, right. Yeah, exactly. But they're sitting most of their guys, right?
Yeah,
Because
yeah,
it's the second night of a back-to-back. They just played the Nuggets, and again, like you said, before LeBron got hurt, right? They were on a tear, and then he comes back, and we thought when he first got hurt, the 2 seed might just be completely a wrap where you can't get it.
yeah,
It's still going to be tough, but they have an opportunity, and we're going to see some of these teams play each other, right? Like we're going to see the Rockets and the Lakers, I believe, play a couple more times. We're going to see the Grizzlies, I believe, play some of these teams a couple more. Well, they don't play the Rockets anymore. The Rockets have the tiebreaker, so that's done. But some of these teams, like I said, will have to play against each other down the stretch, and that could be real important for some of these teams because, again, ideally, you want as good of a seeding as you can, right? Like, if you're Houston, it doesn't matter if you go out in the first round. You just want to win as many games as you can, get as high of a seeding as you can, and then that will help you have home court. And then who knows, maybe something crazy happens, right? Like if you're the 2 seed, their chances of winning a series are probably higher than if they're like 3, 4, or
yeah,
5, right?
yeah.
Because then they're probably playing a team that's just better, right? So that's and that's kind of just where we're at. And again, as we've talked about in the West, it's really just matchups, right? For a lot of these teams, like if they match up better with one team versus the other, then they're probably going to be able to go further, right? Like I think we've seen, like with the Nuggets, they beat the Warriors last time, and we kind of were wondering what that would look like. Probably looks like the Nuggets will still probably have Golden State's number. I mean,
Mhm.
of course, no, nothing's for sure, for certain, but it just seems like too much size, too much physicality. It seems like Steph. I know he had like a back thing in that game, but it just seems like he doesn't seem to have a lot of his best games against that team, and it's hard to be that small and that against a team with that much size, even with the Nuggets not being as good defensively as they used to be. Of course, that game is weird because you could make the case of like, well, Jokic and Murray didn't play. Those guys could be targeted, but they're also just better with those guys in general,
Yeah,
right? Whereas you look at a team, say like Denver and Minnesota. Seems like Minnesota might have Denver's number, right? Where, not, again, they may not be favored, but you could at least squint and see a pathway realistically uh, where they could pull off an upset,
oh
right?
yeah,
Even the Lakers and the Nuggets doesn't seem as far fetched now, where like before it was like no chance, and now you could at least give them a shot because now you have the Luka factor where they don't really have anybody who can really match up with him, and even though they don't have quote unquote center depth, they still do have a lot of size in the front court with their forwards, right? I mean, there's kind of been a conversation everybody's been having where like if you put all their wings together, and then obviously Luka, who's a huge guard, you're talking about like 1,000 pounds of men, right? And that's kind of like that's kind of like a rough situation to go up against for some teams.
heck
So
yeah,
exactly. So it's all about matchups at the end of the day. But OKC, I would still say would be the favorite in the Western
oh
Conference,
yeah, yeah,
and that's the one where like just statistically the way they've been playing with how good and how deep they are, I think that's the one where that seems to be kind of the obvious pick to make the finals. But I think you at least have to give some of these other teams a shot, right? Like they're OKC is going to be heavy favorites against some teams, but I think there will be some where they may be a slight favorite because there's still the element of what does it look like when all these young guys are in a tough series where it's 2-2 or it's 3-2, 3-3. Can they pull it off? And maybe they can. We think they can, right? But there seems to be a lot of people who may not necessarily think that's the case. And
I
I
love it.
do think it would be I do think it'd be unwise to just kind of, I don't know. I think you have to take OKC seriously. You know what I
Yeah,
mean? Like I
you
just
do.
with the way they've been playing and the way they can defend, I think it's kind of hard to look at them as a fluky team. I think they're clearly better than they were last year, and it just seems like they're better than most of the other teams in the Western Conference. But again, you always have, with some of these other Western Conference teams, you definitely can give them a shot. I think the difference is after OKC, there's no obvious number two. Because just look at the win-loss column, right? The 2 seed and the 7 seed are 5 losses away from each other. Like you said, compare that in the Eastern Conference, where the Celtics, even with them not being as good as last season, guess what? They've still only lost 19 games. And then you go all the way down to the 7 seed in the Eastern Conference. Like I said, Houston's the 2 seed with 25 losses. Clippers are the 7 seed with 30 losses. And then look at the East. Celtics with 19 losses, Atlanta with 36. So, that's a big difference, right?
Big
And
time.
obviously, some of the lower seeds, injuries kind of were a big part of that, right? Like for the Hawks, no Jalen Johnson, right? Like that's, one of their best players, right? And then for the Magic, no Jalen Suggs. It still feels like they should be better, but their offense is horrible. So, I
Yeah.
mean,
And they had Paolo and Franz, missing time for not for the
right.
whole season, but
Yeah.
a decent
Yeah.
amount.
Exactly. And that's the other part. Like they did have a long stretch where we didn't get to see all three of those guys play together, right? Other than like, I don't know, the first 3-4 games or
Yeah,
something
it was
like that.
crazy.
Yeah, exactly. So, just kind of a crazy thing. Before we close it out, do we want to talk about the Miami Heat and how they've lost 9 in a row? They've been pretty awful since the Jimmy Butler trade.
Yeah, I mean, in looking back on it, I think we were okay with the return, in terms of, getting Wiggins back and Davion Mitchell, but I mean, they can't put anything together. Like, and Heat fans, I know they're loud. Like, they're very pissed off about how the whole thing ended, and I think a lot of people were. It didn't need to be that dramatic. It didn't need to end that way. But lo and behold, it did. And the Warriors are reaping the benefits, and Miami is sitting at the 10th seed, 29-40. I think there were bright spots earlier in the season, but that kind of just got washed away. Because I know, pre-trade, and it was more so in the rumor era of things where we were trying to figure out where he was going to go and things like that. I think you liked a lot of what you saw from Tyler Hero, but now they feel like super empty stats because they don't really mean anything. You're on a 9-game losing streak. You're the 10th seed. So, I think you do like his progression, but at the same time, you do have to question it. Bam didn't really take that jump that I thought he was going to take post Olympics. I think people were like, oh, crap. Like, we already know that he's a versatile defender. Can he, maybe shoot the ball a little bit better? Not really, not so much, especially with a horrible start to the season that he had. And, it's kind of continued here. And yeah, overall, they're just not deep. They can't really figure out a lineup that really works either. They can't close games. Yeah, they just drop them, and it's weird. But that's kind of what happens when you do trade your best player in theory. Like, you're not really going to recover from that. So,
Right, especially with the return they got was,
yeah.
I mean, basically nothing, right? I mean, I know they got back Wiggins. He hasn't played a ton, but even then, like, he's just, he's not the same caliber of player. And that's why when the trade first happened, that's why I actually liked it for Golden State, just from the perspective of you got a guy for nothing, right? That is a proven guy. And that's also kind of the reason why, no matter how these situations go, this is why teams are not going to just give up on stars and be like, nobody's going to trade for this guy, because it's the level of talent, and you're just better off if you can have a star like that on your team than not, right? And for Golden State, it's worked out for them. We'll see obviously what they do this postseason and from here on out, right? Because this is probably his last stop if I had to guess. But for the Heat, right? It's the end of Heat culture, right? It's the end of an era, right? Where obviously for them, it just, again, like you said, when you trade one of your best guys and then you don't get anything back, yeah, you're gonna look worse. I think for them, they're probably disappointed because I think they at least thought they would look okay, but it's just been bad. And I think that's kind of the rough part, where now they're kind of in sort of the NBA purgatory part of the Eastern Conference. But we also kind of said, like, hey, if Bam and Tyler Hero are your two best players, you're probably a mediocre team,
Yep.
right? Because I mean, you look at them, even though, like you said, Heroes had a really good season, just look at that relative to most of the other teams ahead of them. And that's just not a good enough duo to really compete with the rest of the Eastern Conference. But it's just rough, right? I mean, you look at a team like Detroit with Cade Cunningham and the story they've had this season, right? Where, and again, actually, that's the team who played the Heat, right? Where Cade banks in a three at the
Oh,
buzzer,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
Where you
game
look
winner.
at them. Yeah, exactly. And they went from looking horrendous, right? One of the worst teams in the league last year, to now they're a legitimately good basketball team, right? They're about to have a winning season for the first time in years, right? And again, for them, all due to obviously having a franchise guy in Cade Cunningham who's proven that he's going to be all NBA, I think, this year. And if he's not, he should be. And then, being able to put together a quality group of guys around. And that's one of the differences between having a franchise guy and not having one. Like, the Heat don't have one anymore, right? Like, Jimmy Butler was that, right? And kind of masked some of the issues with the roster, right? Because of the way he was able to play, particularly in the postseason. Once his regular season production started to drop off, then that's when you started to kind of see like, okay, this is probably it for this team. And now they're at a spot where it really is over, right? So for them, they're gonna have to work some magic, right? Because we didn't really expect them to get Jimmy Butler, when prior to him signing there, right? But maybe they can pull off something. I know they were considered to be in the Fox sweepstakes, although the Spurs seem to be his preferred destination. Who knows? Maybe they get Giannis, right? Like, because the Heat have kind of been able to do stuff like that.
They're a big
But
market team. Don't sleep on them when it comes to free agency and trades. Like, people want to go play in Miami.
yeah, but you also do kind of wonder, could Pat Riley maybe have not scared, like, made some of those guys
I know what
not
you
want to
mean.
come there? I don't know. But, like Heat culture pretty much dead now, right? And it died. I mean, what was the time of death? What was the trade deadline? February 8th or whatever,
Yeah.
right? Yeah. Time of death, February 7th, February 8th, 2025. Cause of death, trading Jimmy Butler, or actually prior to that, ticking him off to the point where he didn't want to be there
Yep.
anymore. Also, they didn't want to give him that contract. So, again, glad it's over, right? But, for the Heat, I'm sure if you're a Heat fan, it's a rough spot to be in because, again, you wanted it to end, but I think you would have at least hoped to be okay. But now you're going down probably for a little while. But, who knows? We'll see if they can bounce back, but it's going to have to come from the outside.
Oh,
I
yeah.
don't see like an internal pathway to them
No.
being in the
No.
rest of the because I mean, yeah, those guys could get better, but I feel like those guys are probably close to about as good as they're probably going to be,
Yeah, they
right?
peaked.
Yeah, exactly. Like, and they could get better, but you would need somebody else to really be the franchise guy, and that's not an insult to those two guys because those two guys could be very high level contributing pieces to a really good team, but they can't be the cornerstones of your team, which
Yeah.
I think we kind of already knew, and we talked about it when we did that thing with the Miami Heat zone
Mm-hmm.
guys, right? With the Miami Heat guys, right? Where
Mm-hmm.
we talked about where we were asked like, is Bam a superstar, right? And we kind of talked about it where we were kind of in the realm of no, not really, and that's because part of that is the offensive limitations of his game. Where again, not a bad offensive player, but just not quite a guy you can really build your offense around. Even though he's got a very versatile offensive skill set, right? He can obviously pass and, generate offense for guys, and he's improved as an outside shooter, but he's still not quite good enough of an offensive player to be like the hub of an offense for a really good team,
Yeah.
right? And that's a tall task for a center, anyways, right? Because, how many centers are like actual hubs for their team, right? I mean, it's really only a few guys, right? I mean, you're talking about Jokic, Embiid when he was healthy, right? And then after that, even like AD, for as good as he is, right? He's not necessarily the offensive hub that they are, right? Like the Lakers didn't really build their offense around him, right?
Oh,
He's
yeah.
not really like obviously, he'll get his offense, right? But usually it's, kind of other guys with the ball in their hands. He plays in the post, maybe he rolls to the basket, but and there's a shooting factor too, right? Because like neither Bam nor AD are great outside shooters, and that's probably the other aspect where it's hard to do that without being a quality outside shooter.
100%.
And
Yeah.
for Bam, again, he's improved in that aspect, but I just don't think he'll probably ever be able to get to the tier of superstar. I don't,
Agree.
but that doesn't mean he can't be, a really, a high level contributor to a team. Could he be a number two? Do you think he could, or is he, or like, would you probably have to bump him down to three?
Probably 3, just because he brings a lot. He brings so much defensively, and I think that's a great quality to have in a 3, more than a 2. And I think there's too many limitations in terms of what the modern NBA looks like for him to be a really good number 2. You know what I mean? Like, I think you could potentially get away with it.
Mm-hmm.
With him being a number 2 and get to the finals, but maybe not win it. And we already seen that kind of low key, but.
Yeah. And maybe some of that also is like, who's your number one, right? Like if their number one wasn't Jimmy Butler, but it was somebody better, right? And then Bam is a number two. Could that have been enough?
Maybe.
But
We'll never
yeah,
know.
maybe. But yeah, exactly. And that's kind of what it comes down to. And I guess we could conclude it with that, right? Because there's been so much of a discussion about the third options, right, on all these teams, right? Like there was the debate online, right, between what was it, Austin Reeves and Norman Powell, right? Like which guy is like a better third option. I think it was Lou Williams, right, on his podcast. He kind of mentioned like, what he said about that. But and like I guess it's kind of a conversation about when we look at these third options, and it's really more of a focus on the playoff teams. Those guys are going to have to show up and kind of show out for their teams in the playoffs, right? So I guess which third options are you kind of looking at for a lot of these teams where you're buying stock as in, I think I trust this guy as the third option on these teams.
Austin freaking Reeves. There's no question about it.
Okay.
I
All right.
think
And then,
that's number one.
okay. So you think he's the best third option?
Yeah, 100%.
Okay. All right. So then,
you cannot debate it. I'm sorry,
okay.
you cannot debate it. Like,
so let's go.
Norman Powell's okay, but no, I think Austin
so,
Reeves takes the cake.
All right. So if we kind of go through the stretch of teams, right?
Okay.
Let's say we take the top 3 in the East and then top 6 in the West, right?
Okay.
So, who's the third option for Cleveland? Mobley, I guess.
Yeah, I'm fine with that. I mean, I like him.
All right.
I like what he brings on. I like what he brings on both ends of the floor.
All right. So, like, would you take him over Austin Reeves?
That's tough. Option. That's tough because he's a big man. So we kind of have to gauge him a little bit differently. And what he brings defensively, AR does not bring. But at the same time, AR brings a ton of heat offensively where it's like, holy crap.
And he can run your offense and play
off the ball.
And he does compete on the defensive end too. It's not like he's like a cone.
No. He's a solid defender. It's not you can't look at him and say barbecue chicken. You know what I mean? But he's not like the most elite defender.
Then let's say Boston, right? Who's the third guy? Is that Porzingis? I guess.
Yeah.
Derek White.
I would probably say Porzingis if we're talking full strength Porzingis.
All right.
Like I don't like comparing the big men, but I mean, if we're talking about availability and ability, I would take Austin. All
right. How about the Knicks? Who's the third guy for the Knicks?
Well, I'm taking Austin over whoever the heck it is. I don't care. I'm taking Austin over Bridges, Anunoby, Hart. I'm taking Austin over all 3.
Then out west, OKC. Guess Chet is the third guy.
Yeah, I think J-Dub has kind of solidified himself as number 2 for the regular season.
Yeah.
Once again, another big man, but I'm taking AR. I think you have to take him. Look, the numbers speak for themselves, especially when Braun has been out. I mean, it's really ridiculous, and nobody's really people are talking about it now, but it's crazy.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of where we're at. Like in regards to I think the combination of the growth that the strides he's taken offensively, right, to the point where he's a real guy now, right? Because I remember when we talked about him way back when, the first year we were recording, where you kind of looked at him as a nice player, like a good player, but we didn't really expect him to kind of go up. Did we expect him to be future All-Star? I think we were both high on him, but we weren't quite sure what type of leap, he's taken. But I mean, you look at him this season, he's giving you 25 and 5 essentially as, like you said, a second option or third option for, a team that's one of the best teams in the league. And then on top of that, the nights where, either LeBron or Luka or both are out, right? That's the guy that, has been able to kind of steal them some wins or get close to stealing them wins, right? Like, they had the game against Indiana where he drops 45, right? In a game where neither Luka nor LeBron play, right? And that's, it's kind of a big game where, you need that win. So that's where, it feels like he's entered that realm now. And I think, kind of when you look back on some of these other teams, right? Like that's kind of where the Suns' big 3 seems like it just hasn't worked out. Where Bradley Beal is a good player, but then you kind of factor in the issue of it's also the contract too. Like Austin Reeves is giving you 25 and 5, but making like
pennies,
$13 million, right? Like now he won't make that forever, obviously, right? But it's just so valuable to have a player of that, caliber on that type of contract, right? I mean, even if he was making like 25 million, right? That would still be, really good value. But the fact that it's in the teens and, he's now at a point where he can kind of run your offense, right? In different spots, that's a really good value to have. And even though, and those 3 guys, Luka, LeBron, and Austin seem to complement each other really well, right? And, you have the guy in LeBron that now, I guess he's quote unquote taking the sacrifice, right? So now he's the guy, playing defense and getting rebounds and whatnot, playing more off the ball, right? And then for the Suns, You look at that, right? And now you've seen recently, I mean, yeah, like they're against scrub teams. They just look better without Beal, in my opinion, right? Like, I mean, like
Agreed.
you're kind of like you were better off either not trading for him or, I mean, he has a no trade clause. So, I mean, like, clearly they were
Oh
trying
my
to trade him.
god, bro.
Like, yeah. But it just kind of comes down to that, right? Because it is a conversation where, about the third options. Because we know come playoff time, all of those guys that we mentioned, if any of those teams want a chance to win the title, those guys are going to have to look, like you said, like legitimate third options, right? And for some of them, right, we haven't seen as much of what it looks like in the playoffs. Like for Houston, whoever you think the third guy is, we don't know what that's going to look like in a playoff setting, right? We don't know for sure. And like you said, for some of them, it's a little bit tough to compare because they're bigs, but oftentimes, like just having more size just helps you out in the
Well,
playoffs more so than, as like an individual player than being a guard.
well,
But, just
also, there's one more thing about it, and I'm gonna correct. I'm gonna say he's probably the best third option in the league. Like I would take him probably over Mobley and Chet just at the moment because of his ability to take pressure off of Braun and Luca. And I think that's kind of what you have to gauge a third option by is their ability to take pressure off of the guys who are higher tier ranked in terms of the options. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and I think that's a great point, right? Where you look at him and he can create his own offense, but he can also play within the offense as well. And he can do what you can ask, what you're asking him to do. And like you said, for the other guys, we'll have to see. Like obviously, we know that those guys are really good. The best versions of them probably would be better third options, but we got to see if we're going to get the best version of them. I think with Chet, he's got to be healthy. I think that's kind of the main thing, right? Because we haven't seen as much of him this season. He's been looking better and better with each game that he plays in, right? As he's getting, more and more recovered from his hip thing. And then, with Mobley, like you said, offensively come playoff time, we're going to have to hope and pray that he's able to knock down threes at the same rate that he's knocking them down in the
Because
regular
teams
season, right?
leave those guys open. Not AR, but Evan Mobley and Chet. They leave them open. Like, and it's not that they're bad 3-point shooters to the point where they're being left wide open. And it's really comes down to their offenses that they're in. They generate such good looks. But I feel like with Austin, you kind of see it. Like they're honestly willing to kind of sag off of the number one and number two options sometimes to guard AR, which is
Sure.
you don't really see that with the other teams. Just saying.
Oh, sure, yeah. Because I mean, I remember. I think when they played Portland about a month ago, right? And it was no Luca, right? LeBron and Austin, and they're putting Tamani Kamara on Austin,
Yeah, that's my point.
right? They're not really putting him as much on LeBron, right? But they're
Mm-mm.
putting him on Austin to slow him down, right? As and obviously, in that game he'd be number two as opposed to number
Yeah,
three.
yeah.
Still, like you said, and that's a good point where, how much can you ask those guys to take pressure, off of the number one and number two, right? And can they play within the role where, yeah, there's going to be nights where he's not going to have the ball in his hands as much, but can he still contribute? Because that's the only thing is is better, I think, with the ball in his hands, like when he can create more so than just as a spot up guy.
Mm-hmm.
But, he's not bad at it, I would say, right? And
Agreed.
he can do other stuff. He can rebound, he can play make. But with the way they generate a lot of open looks, he probably will have to be a spot up guy a little bit more, and that's where I think he's going to be tested a lot because he likes to and he's really good at it. So we'll see where that goes, but I think that's a great point that you make in terms of being able to take pressure off that. But I do wonder because it's a conversation that people have had,
Yeah, I've been
and
noticing.
yeah, we can probably, who knows, maybe later on we'll break it down more because as we get closer to the playoffs and the seedings are a little bit more solidified, we'll probably actually try to kind of just focus on the playoff teams
Oh
because we
yeah,
won't have to talk
we're gonna have
about
to break down every team. Honestly, that's in the playoffs.
right, exactly.
Pros,
So,
cons, weaknesses, X factors, kind of what we've been doing in the past.
exactly, right? And then, just kind of last piece of information, Paul George is done for the season, right? He had, believe what, injections, right, in his
In the knee.
groin.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, in his knee. Yeah, yeah. But so his season is over. I mean, I guess I can read out the stats if you want, right? But obviously, year one for Paul George, not necessarily inspiring for the Sixers, right? 16, 5 and 4, 43 from the field, 36 from three. Pretty much the worst season of his career since probably I don't know, as a rookie, and then I guess the other season where he played like 6 games because he came back from the broken foot or broken
Mm-hmm.
leg,
Mm-hmm.
excuse me.
Mm-hmm.
Um, the worst season he's had in a long time, I can tell you that much, right? It's like the so and the tough part is you got 3 more of these left, right? Because you're probably not going to be able to trade him. Maybe not until like the last year of his deal. In 2K, it's gotten so bad that he just retires after like a couple of seasons. So luckily for Philly, he doesn't in the game. He doesn't even finish out his contract. But that wouldn't happen in real life. He's going to finish out that contract. But just for Philly, as we've talked about many times, everything that went wrong could go wrong. Paul George signing didn't work out. Signed Embiid to an extension. He might not play much basketball the rest of the way, right? Maxey, again, good value, right? But obviously now, with him pretty much having to be the number one option, it's not going to look as great. And, they even had some other wins, right? Like Quentin Grimes, pretty good. We'll see if they keep him. Yabusele, pretty good. Jared McCain, pretty good. But even that's been taken away, right? As if you're a Sixers fan. So, I mean,
Trying not to
just
laugh because I
right.
don't want to
Just
laugh
not
at injuries. I'm not laughing at the injuries, but
right.
just bro, what the heck? I mean, we saw it coming, from certain aspects in terms of like, yeah, you got the top free agent, but does the top free agent make your team a whole lot better? Oh, we're gonna rely on 2 guys that are practically made of glass come to the postseason? Yeah, I don't think so. I
Yeah.
feel like we just weren't believers in this squad.
Yeah.
Give them an A for effort, though.
Yeah, and then one last thing, the Celtics actually did sell their team finally,
Yeah.
right? So they agree. So a group led by Bill Chisholm, right, who I guess is like a private equity tech guy or whatever, right? He's agreed. His group has agreed to purchase the Celtics for $6 billion. So it's the highest fee ever paid for an American sports franchise. A little bit more than the Commanders one, right? That one was like 6.05 billion. This is 6.1.
Mm-hmm.
So, Grousebeck, right? The people that have it right now, they're gonna still have it for a couple more years. I think it doesn't really start until like maybe 2027, 2028. But it does seem like they have their new team governor. Believe he's from New England, right? So he said he grew up a Celtics fan. We'll see where this goes, obviously, right? Because we have seen recently with some new ownership some moves that were made that did not necessarily work in their favor, right? But if you're a Celtics fan, hopefully just try to keep the core together as long as you can, given the new CBA, and just kind of work itself out, right?
Yeah, I mean, I heard the quote. I believe was something along the lines of, he respects, what the institution that is in place at the moment. So it doesn't seem like he's going to be, an ambitious meddler and mess things up completely. And it's always a good thing when I think your team governor owner is a fan of the franchise, because I think they treat it with a little bit more respect. I can attest to that based on my football team being the Commanders. Like Josh Harris grew up in Bethesda Chevy Chase, so he grew up a Commanders fan, and he's treated the entire organization with the respect that I think it deserves, and I think it's a great thing.
Yeah, exactly. And so we'll see where it goes. Hopefully, they don't end up trading, like Jason Tatum for, somebody else, right? We'll see where it goes. But
I don't think they
either
would do
way,
that.
no, hey, we didn't expect.
Let me not say anything.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we didn't expect, something else to happen, but it did. So, we'll see. But
Right.
either way, it is, we are at the end of the episode. I guess we had a comment from one of our last couple of shorts, right? From OKC takes down Boston. When will the refs stop giving SGA every call possible? This is from God Did CT8XN. So, yeah. This is something that we've talked about, right? Where there's a lot of people who've talked about the idea of SGA being a free throw merchant, right? And he gets to the line a lot. I guess you could say he has quote unquote some grifter tendencies, but the reality is he's a very tough basketball player to guard. He knows a lot of different angles to score. He's long, very quick with especially with the ball in his hands. He's also like able to kind of switch hands or like kind of be able to pull off dribble moves where he can kind of cross over or like go to the opposite hand really quickly while also being able to move his body. He's just a very
he keeps you off balance. And if you
Right,
know ball,
exactly.
you are more likely to foul when you are what?
Right.
Off
He's
balance.
he's just exactly. He's a very tough player to guard. You know what I'm talking about, right?
Yes.
Just in terms of the movements, like you said, it's a tough type of player to guard. But again, like as a defender, you also got to be smart, right? And it is tough because at the NBA level, right, there is a level of like there are guys that will kind of trick you into getting to the free throw line, right? Like we've seen it before,
Yeah.
of course, right? But at the end of the day, he can do other things other than like if he got 5 free throws in the game, I mean he could still score 30 plus. I mean obviously
Bro.
like
Yeah.
free throws are a big part of his game, but again for a lot of the top scorers, I mean even for like a guy like Giannis, right? That's a guy that gets to the free throw line a ton. Embiid, right? Obviously at his best, even like Anthony Davis, right? Like a lot of Harden. I mean, like a lot of the top scorers tend to get to the free throw line a ton. There are some guys that don't get to the line quite as much as you would think, for sure, right? Even guys like Jokic and LeBron don't get a ton of free throws, but just in general, um, obviously, yeah, so it'll look different in the postseason, but I don't know. I don't really look at him as like if he can't get to the line, he's got nothing else. I mean, like again, if you look at the type of shots and the type of angles he's able to score from, I mean, like he's a legitimately great offensive player. So I'm not really that concerned about that. And with the ball, and I don't know if this is in relation to the Boston game, but I mean how many calls were really impacted by that, and like also from like from the Boston perspective, right? Like they're not going to get to the free throw line a ton because it's a very high volume 3-point shooting team, right? Like most of their guys are going to take, I mean they took 63 threes I think in that game. Obviously that's high for them, but I'm not really worried about it from that perspective.
I mean, yeah, like, and it's not like he's averaging 12 free throws a game. He's only averaging 9. I know that's a lot,
It
in
is
the
a lot,
in the
but
modern NBA, but I mean, but even if you go back like to when LeBron was in Cleveland the first time, he was averaging like 10 free throws. Nobody called him a freaking free throw merchant. KD, when he was in Oklahoma City, he averaged 10 free throws at a point. Nobody called
right.
those guys, free throw merchants. It's crazy. And I think the better term would be a foul baiter because that's what he is good at
Yeah,
in terms of,
right.
like you said, baiting people into doing stupid stuff. Like, oh, you want to slow down because I'm in front of you? Boom, I'm going to
Mhm.
freaking jump to the side. Now I've created the contact. And I think you
Yeah.
have people like James Harden and Trae Young to thank for that, and it's gaming the system. Now, it's not like, Shea isn't going to be able to, destroy teams without free throws. We've seen him do it. And I believe that he leads the league, or, he's up in that percentage of guys that gets to the rack very aggressively.
Yeah. I think he's number one in drives.
He's number one in drives. So if you're number one in drives, you would probably be around number one in free throws because you're going to the line a lot. There's not a ton of elite rim protectors in the NBA. I think people need to realize that, to the point where, yeah, people are going to foul him. There's not a lot of good guards that can keep up with him because he keeps people off balance. They're going to foul him. I'm sorry. Yeah, there might be, 2 or 3 times when he does bait the foul, but what about the other legit ones? Because I'm telling you, if you watch those games, there's a lot of contact on the guy. And yeah, he has a wiry frame, but he's strong too. So he kind of forces you to either give up the bucket or foul, to try and stop him, because that's all you can do.
And a couple of the guys you mentioned, right, are amongst the highest scorers ever. I mean, one of them is a top 10 scorer, and then the other one has the most points scored in all of NBA history.
That's what I'm
So,
saying. And where does Shea rank all time in free throws if he's such a free throw merchant or foul baiter? I'm sure it's not as high as people think.
yeah. So, and again, like, it you can't really get mad at as much at the player. Where you got to get more mad at the officiating, right? Because that's kind of where that. And I'm not talking about Shea specifically, but it's like when we talked about like in some of these games where the refs just make stupid calls, right? And like unlike the players, right? The refs don't usually have quite as much accountability their way versus the
Yeah.
players are expected to just kind of put their hands
Yeah,
behind their
like the
back and
like
just
the Cade Cunningham situation. Like, remember with
right,
Detroit where he got ejected for the
right.
ref not knowing what the heck they're doing? You know what I
Yeah,
mean? I mean,
Yeah, like
I guess the drawing is a little bit too much, but at the same
right,
time, bro, like you have a job to do too. Like the player's job is to play the game correctly, the
right.
right way, win whatever,
Yeah.
and your job is to make sure that the game is officiated correctly. If you can't do your job, then why are you there?
Right. Well, we did have a ref that was, let go a couple years ago for, having a burner account. So, well, that's it for today's episode of Off Ball Takes. Again, let us know your thoughts in the comments on, this uh Western Conference craze as it draws to a close. Which teams do you want to see in the higher seeding spots in the Western Conference? Which teams do you want to see avoid the plan? What matchups do you want to see? What do you think of some of these teams that are struggling? Is it just a slump? Is it a sign that they're just not that good? And also, what do you think about the third options, right? Because I think that's a deeper conversation to continue to have as we get into the playoffs and as we're in the playoffs and coming out of the season, right? Because we're going to have to reevaluate a lot of those guys as we come out. And again, if you leave a comment, we'll read it at the end of the video. Obviously, continue to like and subscribe to help our channel grow. Thanks for watching. This is the Off Ball Takes podcast. We'll see you next time.